Namaskar. My name is Saurabh Nanda and welcome to another episode of Such Conversations Matter. Today's guest is Mr. Priyank Sharma. It's a special episode because Priyank is also an educator like myself, but that's not it. He's also from the same college as I am. He did his engineering from NIT Jalandhar from 2008 to 2012. And that is where our journeys are very similar. After college, he went on to do his corporate career stint, didn't really enjoy it, then chose to do a master's degree in psychology and social work from one of the best universities in India, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. After that, he did a counseling certificate from NCERT, and most recently, he completed his MPhil from NIEPA, the National Institute of Education, Planning and Administration in New Delhi. NIEPA is a very important institute, and we're going to discuss more about it in the interview. Before COVID-19, he was going on to the US in the University of Kansas to pursue his PhD in one of the most unique research topics that I've heard in recent past. His research topic basically relates to the side effects of the current education systems. So you can imagine how the conversation is going to go. We're going to ask a lot of questions about the education system, how it's developed, how it's shaped, and what needs to be done, and a lot of questions which mostly are never asked. So without wasting any more time, let me invite Priyank to Such Conversations Matter. Hi Priyank.
Yes, Saurabh. Good, yeah. How are you? कैसा चल रहा है?
All good, all good. The same old. I think up to it's become such a monotonous thing now, the COVID-19 lockdown, that I can't really remember when there was a normal period. What about you? How are things in Delhi?
Delhi में it's good. Actually, statistically speaking, तो देखा जाए तो the cases number of active cases are coming down, and the daily cases number is also coming down. But I don't know, if you hear from people, it's only growing. So the picture is little kind of a hazy. Let's see.
It is. I think in the near future, I will have to do an episode on COVID-19. I will probably get somebody to talk about it. Well, anyway, Priyank, thank you so much for being on the show and taking out time to do this. And it's a privilege to have you here.
Thanks to you, Saurabh. I think it's a privilege for me as well for you to be called for the discussion. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Great, man. Okay, so let's begin the interview. And I think I've already told my viewers that Priyank is also from the same college that I am. And I have a very unique story of getting into engineering. I'm sure you do too. So please share with us, how did you end up becoming an engineer? What is your unique story?
I don't know unique, but I think most of us have a similar kind of a story where I think we thought of becoming engineer, not in an engineer, thought of going to an NIT mostly. Right? It is not becoming engineer as such. It is about going to an NIT. So being good in certain subjects had given you the privilege to crack an entrance exam. And then since I got a seat into an NIT, which was given an engineering degree. I'm sure if it was giving a psychology degree, I would have pursued psychology. That wouldn't have made a difference. It was more into getting a brand of NIT and going to a college for becoming an engineer. So I think scoring well, somehow getting a rank which fetched me in NIT was the sole reason for pursuing engineering.
All right. Well, that makes sense. Actually, a lot of students do get into that. And today we are going to discuss a lot about those things only. So after engineering, how did you decide to get into education?
I think this question have अब तो मेरे को रट्टा था याद हो गया ऐसे तो बोल के okay I don't know where to begin, but let's start from the beginning. What happened was after my engineering I got a corporate job, which ideally was an IT company. So I had already plans of leaving my engineering because I knew that though academically I was doing well. So academically, if you see my grades, I was in the top 10 of the class. But somehow I knew that engineering is not my cup of tea, so I had to switch. So getting into the corporate, I had a lot of time because I was on bench in the IT. So there I started finding courses, finding new places where I could do something interesting. And so there was an exclusive course in TES Guwahati, which was MA Social Work in Counseling, so which really appealed to me. I was not of the idea that I'll really get into the course, but somehow I did. So the idea was that, since I was not knowing what exactly to do after 12th grade. And, most of us don't have an idea. So maybe I'll work in the same field. Something, the education system as such never asked me to think what I want to do. There was not even a line of thought. So I thought maybe I'll work in the same area and in the education sector and, ask students, help students to figure out what they want to do. And so for that, I thought, okay, maybe basic understanding of psychology is needed. And social work and counseling is a very good start for that. So I pursued that course, and later I worked for a year in the rural parts of Maharashtra, Haryana, and Punjab into career consulting. And then I thought, okay, maybe I should get more knowledge in the psychology sector. I did a diploma course in guidance and counseling. Then again I worked for a year. Now what I started realizing was that somewhere there are two ways to look at it. One, there is a gap in the education system in terms of what you want to do, and your education system is not able to help you in that. So one thing, with your work, you fill that gap. Another thing is, with your work, you exploit that gap and commercialize it. So for me, it was more of that. I was kind of exploiting it and commercializing it. So, I thought maybe I should work in the grassroots, and why not work in the education where the problem lies. So from there, I thought, okay, I should get to education, and then I started pursuing my MPhil integrated PhD with NIEPA.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how I landed up in education.
Wow. Well, it is very interesting to know that, because I share the passion that you have, going into the grassroots and, helping develop the country and the people in it. And I think a lot of engineers from colleges like NITs, IITs also have a similar feeling of, working for the government or working for the country, basically, not even for the government, but for the country. But somehow, somewhere, it gets lost. Right? Have you lost that yet, or is it still strong and you're still working towards it?
That's a very good question. I think both yes and no, because the problem with getting back into academics is a lot of things which I've lost. When you have a coercion to do something even if it be in education, because earlier to this course, this whole affair of MPhil PhD, I was a lot into traveling, I was a lot into reading, and there was a lot of things I was doing in education already. I was thinking of projects, researches, and everything. But somehow when I went to the whole process of MPhil PhD, that that rigor started getting lost, and I started again questioning. Though I was again doing my MPhil, getting a degree and everything, but again that rigor, they say, right, the system changes you and everything. That started having an effect. But I'll still say that it has completely not overtaken my passion. So we're still in the process. Let's say which way the boat goes. But I think it is still a 50-50 thing. Let's see.
Okay. So Priyank, I'm going to drill you more. Why? Because you're not sharing the complete story. See, so what you're saying is your MPhil and PhD journey kind of, shaved off a lot of passion that you had for working at the grassroots, because probably you became mature, or probably, you had that bias, which is called the Dunning-Kruger bias, I think, where the smarter you become, the knowledgeable you become, then the lower confidence you have. Did that happen to you? What were the reasons for that?
Again, when you see, it is not like I have lost the passion to work in the grassroots. It is more of that I had to do certain things the way my MPhil course demanded, in the manner which they wanted, not in the manner which I wanted to. So, there is a conflict. So what happened was, maybe let's say I wanted to read a book or write a book or do whatever things which I had planned. Somewhere those plans were hit by the whole MPhil coursework. I'm not saying that it is not work. I've learned a great deal in my MPhil. I've learned about policies. There's plethora of knowledge which I've gone through the whole process of MPhil, and which has led me to a better understanding the whole education. I'm not saying that it has not given me anything, but the whole pattern which has followed because of the way coercion has come in, where the MPhil demanded it, so I had to do it because that's my own thing of writing. Because I used to do a lot of writing. I had a blog on Facebook, and Facebook is not the right place to have a blog still. But I used to write a lot. I used to read a lot. That way took a sidetrack. and then I had to move into the whole MPhil thing as the MPhil course demanded. That is what I'm trying to say.
Hmm. So this has always been a very interesting question for me, and I've asked a lot of researchers this question. Do you think the structured approach of research kind of kills creativity as well?
That's again a good one. See, I think anything which is coerced in a manner, kills some part of creativity. I'm not saying everybody has the same experience, but if you see the basics of it, when you say structure, like who built it and for whom it is. So there we have to understand this, if you are having a structure which is built, which is, pre-built, which is already in shape, and the student doesn't have a voice in it. There's no agency of the student or who is taking part. There comes the problem. But if you build a structure, which is because you need some pathway. So if you build a so-called structure, not a structure as such, but if you build a structure which is in tandem with or in consent with the person who is going through it, that is where it becomes more intriguing. So I think that way it will make more sense.
Mm. Okay, and I think something similar happened to the university you're from. Please tell us a little bit about NUPA and how it was the most creative force in the world of education at one point of time, especially when it started, and now nobody knows about it.
No, I think, see, it is not like people don't know about it in a way because NIPA has its education being very recent. So it's hardly been 12 years when NIPA has started with education. So if you see, NIPA had a lot of trainings and other stuff going on with that ministry work going on for like a lot of time. But it doesn't come to the common. So if you ask any BEO, DEO, district education officer, block education, everybody will know about NIPA. They have high respect for NIPA. But for the common people to know about it, for people to pursue it, it has to come in the education domain, which is a very recent. So that is why I think NIPA has not had its stake in the education market. Its name is not established as such, because if you say 2000, let's say late 2000, and then first PhD batch would have graduated in again mid of this 2010s. So it is hardly 5 years when NIPA started producing people. So it will graduates, PhD graduates. So it will take time, I think.
Yes, I mean, I get that part. So they've started changing recently. I mean, NUPA was the first university in the world. I think it started in 1961, if I'm not mistaken, and it was funded by the United Nations. And India was the first country to have such a university which was funded by the United Nations. It was supposed to create education systems for the rest of the world. Like, where did it lose its path over there? That's what I'm interested in.
So, no, see, if you see the objective of NIPA, so I think that's where the thing is. It was a whole planning and administration kind of. So if you see IEP, there's one institute in Paris which is on a similar model, and NIPA was created with the same idea. But again, I don't think it has lost it as such. But what the difference here we are thinking of is the whole objective to the institute. So we see there is UDICE model being created. NIPA has done phenomenal work in creating a portal, bringing data from all the schools across the country to the portal, and somehow they have created structures for people to join those models, and the trainings which is happening BODOs. Those data portals, those trainings have done phenomenal in terms of giving to the education system as such. But again, it is at the administration level. So that way it is doing a great work. But again, at the education level, producing MPhil graduates, PhD graduates who take the name of NIPA to various places where people talk about it and everything, that is yet to happen because it has not produced a constant number of graduates. That is what I'm trying to point. It is not that NIPA has not been able to do things. It has done it, but again, not the way we recognize it.
All right. And I think they should definitely need to, they need to work on their marketing a lot, I guess. So, Priyank, this begs, like, there's this question which is begged to be asked over here, which is just, so important here. When we create such organizations and we create education systems, I mean, I'll take the example of India itself. You've created a system in a country which is, well, still growing and still developing. And by the time you think that the system will go out and reach out into the grassroots level, and by the time there will be a feedback which will come back to you and tell you whether what is working and what is not working. It takes a huge amount of time, and there are a lot of gaps in between, right? But since you're already invested in that system, but you're not getting the feedback in time, does it force the system to become a self-sustaining organization? That boss, no, you have to live with me, you have to let me sustain to give you enough ample results, and only then you can think of changing it.
I think any system has to have a cyclic flexible thing. So if you say, when you say anything is put in process, anything is put in implementation mode, so it has to come back to the system. No system can have a rigid idea of knowing things before itself, right? So when you create that is the problem. I think the core problem which a lot of systems have is that there is a planning which is happening, there is the implementation which is happening, but it doesn't go back to the planning mode. So if you talk about any feedback, it has to go back to the system and tell that boss, this is not working. So for example, if you see in Indian context, if you see after independence, there was heavy focus on higher education, then secondary education. We very late realized that without making the foundation of primary education strong, we cannot have very high quality higher education. So that was a very late realization, because the whole economic demanded at that time, because we had to open the economy and such a low literacy rate and everything. So for industrialization to happen, modernization to happen, we looked at the whole higher education thing first. But I think if you see, the system should have realized very early that maybe you have put things at stake in higher education. Fine, the 5-year plans are talking about it and everything. But why not you see that primary education is something which needs to be foundationally made strong for this whole loop to exist. I think that way it is very important to have a cyclic kind of a flexible thing in the system.
Okay. So do you think our education system has those loops or has that feedback cycle, or we still need to do a lot for that?
I think any system has to do a lot of things, and I'm again not saying we cannot. What we cannot disregard is a lot of effort being done by a lot of people in the field of education. So it is not like people are not doing it, but system is a very complex in itself, and there's no go-to solution that okay, this is something you should do and we are sorted. And for a big country like India, so such a diverse population, it is very difficult to have some examples, because people usually quote examples of different countries who are doing better, who are doing much thing. But it is very difficult for us to even look at the country like this, because it is not just the top leadership will matter. The leadership will matter at every level. It has to flow at every level. So it is not like even if the bottom of the pyramid has a very good leader and the top doesn't have the rigor about it, and they don't fund you, what can you do? And if the top funds you and the bottom doesn't have a good collaboration again. So again, I think it's a very complex thing to have one answer.
That's very beautifully put, man. That's really well put, and that's a lot of insight actually for a lot of educators in India today. So, Priyank, what are you doing right now? Tell us about your PhD and research and other things that you're involved in.
So I like to read, so there are a lot of big books which I've finished in recent times, and I'm working on I just submitted my PhD report. A certain kind of education is dominating the globe. I always say there's a virtual invasion happening. There are no armies which are coming in and fighting and taking over the countries. It's an education system which is telling that your way of knowing, because education is nothing but learning, right? So you learn new things, and so just telling people that your way of knowing, your way of learning are all inferior, and we know it, what is better for you, and somehow the interesting part is there are people who are voicing their opinions against it. You know about this professor from Canada. He's a Harvard graduate, and Wade Davis. So he has been telling how the traditions of people in Africa, for example, are considered superstitious, but are way more important for their kind of living and everything. But again, you need a Harvard degree to tell people that it is something which is fine, because anybody from Africa comes and tell you that no, we are doing a better, you will be discarded. You will not be considered because you have the authority, the voice to say something is right only when you have a degree from a Harvard or something like that. You cannot yourself say that I belong to this community, so I know it. This is good for us, but that doesn't happen. So I think there is a core problem with it. So that is where my PhD proposal is revolving around and trying to see how the whole structure is dominating and there is homogenizing of cultures and an erection of consumer culture, which is getting endangered in the societies.
That's super interesting. Are there a lot of people doing this? Because, well, it's kind of counterproductive, right? I mean, so you research about this and then you want to teach in a university which actually preaches this. So you're going against the very tenet. So do you think that's a good career move?
I think that's where the core issue is because again, when I ask myself that you are rejecting certain forms of, but I need this education to even reject it, that's the core problem. So I don't know about how the career move is, and again, there are not a lot of takers of this this research area in the field of education. But I'm also evolving, and let's see how it goes. What is the response on a proposal, and how do I build it? That is something forward, but we'll see.
All right. So one very interesting question in this. So you said there are few people in the world who are researching about this. I remember one conversation that we were having the other day, and you said you're basically going to research about the side effects of the current education system, right?
Right.
So there are few people researching about it. There are definitely people in Canada and the US, as you rightly pointed out. Are there people in India, apart from you, who are doing similar research?
See, I think not exactly this area, or not that I know of, but again, something similar works have been done. So how people put it is, they will not put it as side effects. They will not put it that education is leading to something like this, something bad, or because ideally education should not. So they will rather put it as that, these are the areas we should improve on, these are things we should work on, and everything. What the other way, the way I contest it is that the form of education we have is having some side effects. It is having some really bad ill effects which should be looked at. But that is not the way people put it. People want to put it in the way that these are the areas which we should improve on. So that is a very subtle way of putting things. But that things are happening, but not the direct way, or not that I know of.
Well, I would love to read your research papers in the near future, and best of luck for that. So,
thank you.
Moving on to the next set of questions, Priyank. You have done so much research about the education systems, not only in India but also education systems around the world. What have you discovered? That the important or very, very strange things in our education system which you could only discover after you research about it. Anything like that which surprised you?
I don't know. When we say surprise, it is a good or a bad thing. But again, I will move to with the discussion which we just had. I'll just elaborate a little bit on that. See, when we say education, if you go to any person in this country, or let's say global, education is seen as a panacea, as a solution to a lot of problems.
Right.
Whether you say unemployment, whether you say poverty, whether you say even crazy things, witch hunting, superstition, everything. So somehow education is seen as a solution to all of the problems. Now, that is something which is very strange, because from where I see it, education is not structured, or let's say is not modeled in such a way that it does any of it. So let me give an example. So I recently wrote a research paper on suicides and education. So, not recently, last year. So what happened was, what I did is, the NCRB gives you data. I think the core objective, goal of education should be to at least first give survival skills to a child. The child should be able to survive. When you survive only, then you can do anything. So I took up the data, NCRB data of last 15 years, and where suicide data was.
Can you tell us? Sorry to interrupt you. Can you tell us about the organization that you're mentioning?
National Crime Records Bureau.
Okay.
So in that, the second chapter comes as accidents and suicide. In that, this report is being given from 1968, but suicide with respect to the education level of people who are committing suicide has only been happening for last 50 years. That data is only coming from last 50 years. So I analyzed that data. So if you see, there's a very interesting line there. So the rate of suicide is constant. The literacy rate has gone up. Somehow, the rate of suicide is constant. I don't understand that. Okay, let's just take it. Okay, it is happening. The second is much more interesting. If you see the people who are committing suicide, so in 1995, people who were committing suicide were mostly illiterate because there are more number of illiterates. Now, if you see, slowly that group moved to most suicide happening in the category of first primary grade education. That moved to middle grade education. Now it is currently residing in secondary grade. So if you see, people who are doing suicide, most of them, if you see them by education level, the level is also increasing with the rise in illiteracy. That certainly tells you that there is no effect of as such of education on the conscience of the person to commit suicide. Because the group which is committing the most suicide, that group education level is also increasing. So I think that's a very strange thing. What do you do? Why do you give education to a child? What is the reason? When the child again, it is having literally no effect on the survival skill of the child. And another thing, if you see the way education is putting it, I'm giving you another example. This is if you pass 12th grade, you went to an NIT. So if you see, I don't understand how come physics, chemistry, math can decide you to be an engineer in every field. That is something which we all don't understand. That how can I be an engineer just because I'm good in physics, chemistry, math? I can be a mechanical engineer also, computer science engineer also, any engineer, just because I'm good in physics, chemistry. All right, that is fine. Now, when you say education is a tool for curbing unemployment, that is also a crazy idea. Coming out of poverty, there are links. I'm not saying again. There are links even given by UN when education has helped people come out of poverty. That is definitely not discarded. But if you see it from very subtle logical point of view, when there are, let's say, 10,000 seats in NIT and 10 lakh students are applying, how much ever brilliant students are, let's say all 10 lakh students are brilliant, you still have 10,000 students who will pass the exam. Never in your wildest dream that can happen, that those 10,001 students will be taken. So what you are essentially trying to say is, if a certain education is given to 10 lakh students, you will ideally select only 10,000. So that means you will be able to give jobs of certain kind to only 10,000 people. You cannot claim that it is a solution as such, because now what ideally you are doing is, you don't have resources. Again, you is a problem, you may ask, but government or the system or whatever you can take. So you don't have resources to give certain education, or let's say engineering, to every child. So what you do is, if the child demands, what is the way to curb that demand? So you tell that it is your mistake that you failed in the entrance. You did not score in the top 10,000. It is not our mistake. But ideally, somebody has to fail. So you legitimize the failure in that process. You tell the child that onus is on you. It is not on us. But the onus, somebody has to fail it. You have only 10,000 seats. So these are very strange things which are happening in the domain of education when we look at education and how we look up to it. And I think, again, as I said in the previous, some people who are talking about it, I'll give one example. It just reminded me of a very interesting example by Professor Wade Davis again. So he talks about, for example, he is from Canada. So he tells us that in his area, in his community, mountains are considered as secret. So, slowly education came and, people were more educated and everything. So, system started telling young children, that mountains are not gods and they are a piece of rock. All right. So, ideally you are taking away the superstition from them. But what he asked, the question is, when they move from being considered as a sacred to a rock, they are ready to mine it in whatever way possible, not considering the environment. So when you mine it, you are harming the ecosystem. So Professor Wade Davis since he is a Harvard graduate, and he is saying such things, people are listening. And where is the ecological footprint of it? How do you measure that, that practice of considering as sacred or God is wrong? How do you see the ecological effects of it? So I think those people, there are a lot of talks like this happening, but again, they are coming from people who are at a privileged position to talk about it. Only then people are listening. That is the thing I want to talk about.
But that is amazing. I mean, very very good examples, and that is probably the social and psychological basis of a lot of problems that are there in our education system, because it fails at fulfilling or filling gaps which are created in our society, because we are moving from one kind of society to another. We are evolving, we are
Right.
growing in civilization, and all the gaps which are created because of this transition, our education systems are not able to fulfill that. Like I was reading somewhere recently, and they basically talked about the fact that, I mean, it's a known fact that the education system that we have today in India or in Africa, a lot of places actually, it's basically designed to produce more and more clerks, right? Because that was what was needed 100 years ago. But so if you make somebody study like a clerk and then you expect him to be an amazing doctor or an amazing social scientist, then the entire expectation is just completely baseless. So yeah.
I think, see, I will not delve deeper into it, but this whole clerk thing is this sounding the education videos a lot. Like any education is talks about this whole clerk thing, how the Macaulay
Yeah.
thing that he came in and everything. But I think there is the other side of the story as well, which is profoundly given by Professor Kishan Kumar in his book Politics of Education in Colonial India. Okay, so what people usually believe is that British came in with the idea of again, this is very profoundly put. I am not the right person to talk about it because Professor Kishan Kumar is the one whose ideas I'm borrowing. But he very very nicely draws with a lot of research draws implications from this. So people tend to believe that the education system was created to produce clerks, and somehow it was British wanted people to only do their systemic work and everything. But in the other side of it is what was happening, that India was very rooted in its tradition, and British people wanted Christianity to spread. So the missionaries were not able to do a lot of work which was supposed to be done, and they were finding it difficult because the roots, the tradition roots, the cultural roots were very very strong. And to dismantle it, the education system was brought in. So what ideally had to be do was, people were trying to be told through the education that your culture, your ideas of sustaining life and everything are inferior and are impractical. Your idea of God or your idea of living life are all impractical. That can only happen through reasoning. That cannot happen through building clerks, like having system which only produces clerks. That definitely cannot happen. So what ideally was the idea that people started identifying, or let's say the superstitions in the whole idea of culture and the tradition which they have, and they accept the more rational religion, the more scientific religion, Christianity in the process. That was the idea. Though they failed miserably in this, and there were a lot of critical thinkers which were produced by the system who started speaking about this whole damage which was being done by which in the inside being done by the British. So that way, Professor Kishan Kumar talks about how the system was actually based on a very different criteria or idea than what we tend to know of.
So I completely agree with that, and I think there's an interesting point over here. So in India, definitely it failed. I mean, failed as in from their perspective. Christianity did not spread as it was supposed to. But in Africa, the opposite happened. So do you think they succeeded? Macaulay succeeded in Nigeria and Kenya and all these places?
Not everywhere. So if you see, there's a very interesting story of Amazon, and where if missionaries had gone in, and there was a lot of use of cocoa in Amazon.
Sorry?
What happened? Yeah,
Cocoa.
Cocoa. The one, yeah. So scientists had gone there and had told them that use of cocoa is so much of cocoa is not good for them. So they had done a lot of research. It is given in the book Wayfinder. If you read that book, it is also very interesting. So if the scientists had gone in there and told people that uh, high use of cocoa has very ill effects on your health, and it is not the ideal thing, all that. But people were rooted in the tradition. They tried to push. Missionaries came in and tried to tell people that the more scientific thing is our religion or practice or whatever. But people did not heed. After some time, the missionaries left and nothing happened. A lot of time. Then another group of scientists went there after some time, and then they started doing their side of experiment. And then they claimed that the use of cocoa is very ideal for them, and it is something which is rooted in their tradition and is very important. So what we try to see culture through the lens of science every time. I think there's also an interesting quote by Henry Zero, this professor Henry Zero. He gives a culture of positive. So positivism is rational. So he tells that how we are taking rational as the epitome of the rationality as the epitome of seeing things. Yeah. We see science as the scientific sciences as the only things only lens through which everything should be seen as. But our own understanding of rational, our own understanding of science is so limited. How can you see through a lens which you don't know completely of, or you can never know completely of? So he talks about the whole culture which is prevailing in the industry, and they're trying to demean the whole anthropological work which is going in the education scenario.
That's very well put. In fact, I mean, this brought a smile to my face because I wanted to share this with the viewers as well. I'll put a card on the video as well. In the previous previous two episodes actually, I've been talking with another batchmate of mine. His name is Narendra Joshi. And in the first episode, we talk only about, the modern political structures. In the second episode, we talk about the philosophy of religion and how religion and philosophy impacted political structures. And in that also, we compare, Indian philosophy or Eastern philosophy, if you may, with Western philosophy, wherein the Western philosophy kind of limits itself to the rationalization of everything, and the Indian philosophy is more about experiential learning. So I think viewers, you should definitely watch that episode to understand more what Priyank just talked about. Thank you so much for that, Priyank. That is such an amazing insight. So Priyank, so the entire conversation that we're having is about customizing education systems to the people, right? Have we tried to do that with the Indian education system? Have we tried to customize it for the Indian people? Yes or no?
Yeah, I think both yes and no, and I think it is not simple a question as it seems that For example, if you see, we are the mayor mentioned that we don't have a national language is based on the idea that we want cultures to thrive. We want people to have a foundational understanding of language because for a culture to thrive, language is the basis of it. If you see how rapidly we have scientists, agriculturists, everything talking about so many things, but you see the people who are talking about the ethnicities being lost, are on the basis of the languages being lost, and we are rapidly losing the knowledge, the forms, because the language is getting lost. Again, the domination of one particular language across the globe is huge, and again, I derive from my idea of domination of certain language. So that way, yes, a lot of efforts being done to customize the whole process. But again, see if you see NIEPA's the most recent education policy, there's a line in there. It is very clearly written that education is still considered as primary as a tool for economic development. So when you see it as a tool for economic development, you have economic aspects attached to it which are of prime concern. So not the learnings, the sustainability, the environmental conservation things which are supposed to come out. So when you see it from a picture of economy, you see it as a global GDP. Where do you stand? So when you again talk about the global thing, it is you have to derive from economies and how standardization happening. People take things from models from different countries, and instead of doing something, or because we when you derive something from the global, the self-sustenance part of it comes into question. So you depend on other economies. So if you see, we see US as a hallmark of GDP as big content, but its economy is so much dependent on anything happens across the globe. US economy gets so it's a very dependent economy. So that way, we are also kind of so much of economy being opened, and we are losing that self-sustenance part of things. So that way, I think we can, in the current model, we may not have very unique, customized Indian-centric as such. We have to adhere to the global standardized procedures. And again, why World Bank funds you? Because you will have certain goals. Why IMF funds you? Because you have certain aspects. So all these things play a complex part to the whole process.
So, I mean, these things are so evident. Then why don't we have, like you kept on quoting a lot of professors, and out of them only one professor you quoted from India, right? Why don't we have these world-renowned educators? Like there should be an army of such people because our higher education research is of some decent quality. Why don't we have those people who are, at world stage telling the world what you're doing is wrong?
Again, see, I think we have a lot of. So if you start from Mahatma Gandhi or Ghosh, Rabindranath Tagore, all those people are really renowned in the old times. Now, if you see currently, if you see Professor Krishna Kumar, Yashpal, J.B.J. Tillak, those have done wonderful work. The problem is not. Okay, let me tell you this with an example. So if you see, Assam is having floods. Across the country, people don't know. Delhi, something happens. Every child in the country. Similarly, Finland has the best education system. Can you name 2 educators from there? It is the best education system, but do you know 2 educators, world-renowned educators there? How come? It is the best education. So it is more of how Delhi is in the center of all the attraction, the way US is in the center. And anything happened in the US, being taken from US, talked about in the US, is considered as something which is to be paid heed to. Harvard publishing a paper is a great deal. Even we want to publish a paper in their journal, not our EPW, their journal. Then it gets the recognition which you wanted to have. So that way, I think we have a lot of education which are doing a lot of work. But even though there are countries like Finland who have the best education, so-called, again, that is a question mark for a variety of reasons. But we don't know. So that way, I think the limelight is somewhere else. That is the reason.
So it's just a matter of bad marketing and not being at the right place at the right time.
I don't know. We can ever have a good marketing at that per se. But if somebody has to be recognized, if Professor Krishna Kumar, I had met him in this thing. So there are flaws in our whole research procedures and being done. We know how much of a fake papers we are reproducing and everything. So he also went to Columbia, studied there. No, not Columbia, University of Toronto. Studied there and then came back to India. Works get recognized and everything. So that way, I think everybody has to go derive an education, and it's very difficult as such to cultivate something and go on the top, because that takes a lot of time. You have to get an education there from the limelight area. For example, if Bihar in India, Bihar guy has to get a line, has to come to Delhi, get an education, then okay, yeah, fine. That way it works like that. I don't know, we can ever have a good marketing.
Yeah, that makes actually a lot of sense. I mean, I spent some time in Denmark, and when I went there, and was having this, I used to have detailed discussions with my mentor over there, and one day I just asked her, why do you think that you guys are the happiest in the world? I mean, I get it. You're a developed country, and there are certain things that India will probably not have, in the coming decades that you guys already have. But why are you the happiest people? I am happy. I consider myself happy. And then her single line answer was good marketing. So, and that good marketing also is very relative because, people, researchers in the US, think tanks in the US started comparing the US with Denmark. So that is why Denmark became so important. Right. So that's a very important point that you put across. We're talking about the education policy, which came out in 2019, and we also had a discussion about that. Why do you think it has so many loopholes? Why do you think, with all the knowledge and all these good educators, researchers, scientists, social scientists that we have, why couldn't we come up with a good education policy? What is missing over there?
See, it is very difficult to say it is not. Well, of course, it is a very detailed book. And I'm again saying that education policy has done wonders. From where I see it, my MPhil thesis was on multicultural education, and I was looking at the tenets of multicultural education with respect to policies, that how policies incorporated 5 basic tenets of education. And this is the recent policy is the only policy which has talked about all the 5 tenets. And the policy before that, 1968 policy, 1986, 92 policy, have not been covered all the parts. I don't know what exact loopholes you tend to talk about in that sense, but I think we need to understand what basic thing is. If you have a policy, what is the implication? No, if any document, what is the implication? Let us say you have a perfect policy. I'm not going into debate that it has a loophole, it is not a loophole. Let us say you have a perfect policy. Or let us say even if you have an imperfect policy, whatever is already existing in the policy is good. Let's say there are 2 good parts. Where do they go? If you talk about 1966 Kothari Commission report, I think tremendous report. It has wonderful work in that report. But what has happened? Where do we lead? What if you have said in the policy that Indian education services should be thought of? The government should bring in something. Is government going to do something like that? No. Ever something like that is going to happen? We don't know. So to put in a document which can be interpreted in different ways. So the third part is you put in a policy, you tell, okay, this is things which are important, this is happened. But how do people at the grassroots level or at the district administration level, and how do interpret that policy? How do they implement those policies? That is where the core problem. The core problem is, I don't think never will be a very ideal policy, because again, unless the policy in itself is a very cyclic thing. Because I don't understand the idea that you have a policy in 68, then you go to 86, revise it in 92, then you come to 2019, which is still a draft. We have not come up with the final policy. What is the idea behind it? You have to have a policy which keeps getting revised, keeps getting amended as such, the way we talk about constitution and other things. And then, more importantly, we talk about the implementation part of it. Or let's say the interpreted part of it. How do people construe the whole policy? How do they take leaves out of it and put it in their practice? And that is where I think the important part is. Policy just writing, have an Indian education service doesn't serve. The government is not bringing it. It doesn't serve.
So what you're saying is like the implementation is missing. Otherwise, the policy talks about all the right things.
Again, I'm not exactly saying that, but it does talk about a lot of right things. But again, when it comes to implementation, it doesn't work in tandem. And I keep saying that policy has to be a cyclic thing. We do revise it. So if you see policy comes in, there's a lot of revisions which happen. So that revision has to be continuing. It is not a document which goes through a revision like 86, 6 years to revise it and then put the final. No, I don't think the idea. Keep revising it, keep talking about it. Let it be a flowing draft, or let it be a dynamic policy. I don't know. Maybe I am not the policymaker, so I don't know the pitfalls of it. Maybe there are things which I don't understand. That is why it works like that. Maybe when I get in the system, I will know, okay, Priyank, what you're saying was complete bullshit. It doesn't happen that way. Maybe that is the case. But again, from where I see it, I don't know why it is not a dynamic document.
I absolutely agree with you, Priyank, over there. In fact, like when I read certain parts of the policy document, I was expecting because of my own biases towards data, but it just did not have data. And when you talk about millions of students, and you're talking about the third biggest education system in the world, the highest number of universities in the world, you need to have some data somewhere that, till 2018, this happened. And now we have made a draft of the new education policy in 2019. So it is based on 2018 data. So
I think that's a very important piece. I think policy should first start with, 86, 68, these are the policies which came in. This is the amount of work which has been done in this. This is what we have been able to achieve. This is what we have not been able to achieve. This is where the implementation flaws were. Then maybe it is happening at the superior level, I don't know. Then we should start working on having a new policy. Unless you talk about the previous vision, which are completely lost in thin air, it doesn't make. Why? Next 10 years we'll have another policy. What is the use of a policy first? You should have a have a complete review of what has happened in the past. And then maybe what you just said, 2018 tak itna hua, then we can talk about what we can usually
Right.
do.
So you touched upon something very interesting, which is going to form probably the most important question of this entire interaction. We have had these discussions before about if there was something like the Indian Education Services, we would have
Yes.
both of us probably would apply for it, and get selected or something, and then start working with the government to change things. Similar things like that are happening. Like Haryana government has its own thing. Delhi government has recently advertised about fellowships. In Punjab, we have something called Sangi Sikhya. So they are getting people, and then there are a lot of philanthropic organizations as well, like Azim Premji Foundation and so on. Teach for India is there. Do you think a cadre like the Indian Education Services will help improve things, or it's something of let's say a childish dream?
No, I think we should definitely have it. Not because I believe in the idea that it will revamp the education system, but I think we need it for now because there are a lot of things which are not working. What I also think is, if you take the whole, what is the belief going around in the education system is the bureaucrats, understand education through experience. This is also a good thing, but through not the model of education, through not the process which the education is going through. I'll give an example. Let's take a smaller entity, a university. If you see the universities, who is the administration, who is administrating, who is doing the administrative work in the union, who is the registrar? Most of the time, the registrar will be an administration guy, nothing to do with education. How can you have a non-education guy in administrating an education? Why people feel like saying that administration doesn't require the knowledge of the education, but that is very preposterous. It doesn't work that way. Ideally, if I talk about my university, NIEPA, it doesn't have a research now. But NIEPA, when I was talking to my vice chancellor, he very clearly said this thing that we want to have a registrar who is having an education background, who works in the education industry, who can, because that way he will understand the problems of the industry, the problems of the students are going, the things which are supposed to happen. So even in a small entity of a university, when we are looking at registrar who is at the administration level to be a non-education guy, think of this in the broader prospects of the country. Where do we see bureaucrats come? Why not they come from the education sector? I think we have to understand this, put it a simple example to the broader context, and we have to bring in the people who have done fabulous work through lateral entries like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, so I'm one of my batchmates, from our college only. He's currently working in the Punjab government as a civil servant, and he told me that the maximum amount of funds that any department of the Punjab government gets is the education department, because it's the biggest department. They have to pay salaries of so many people, they have to maintain so many facilities, buildings, then they have to distribute books, bags, meals, everything. So they have the maximum amount of money. And that is, I mean, I personally, I don't have the data to support this, but it sounds like it is as big as the Indian Railways. And if Indian Railways has its own service, why shouldn't the education system have its own service, right?
Right.
So, final question, Priyank. It's such a stimulating conversation. Can you please tell us about approaching the new normal, the forum that you created? That's where we met. And what do you think? Why do you think that forum is important? And what do you think it will become in the future?
I don't know the last part of it, but I'll tell what is the idea behind it. See, I think the whole idea was to build, since we are in times which are unprecedented. We are facing a crisis, and somebody said that crisis is an excellent opportunity for that. So, the thought was that we have to understand this in the context. So there are a lot of similar things happening across. There's something called a silver lining for learning, which is run by some professors in the US. They talk about the whole education system being affected and the measures being taken by different countries. So they have speakers from across the globe. So I had a very, let's say I had a doubt on that how how do you talk about a country? Maybe you can talk about a small country, but how do you talk about a country like India? It's so diverse. The challenges in Delhi will be very different from challenges in the Northeast. Challenges, the curriculum will be very different from challenges in the pedagogy or administration or the other stuff. So I think that way the idea was to create a portal where we could bring in these dialogues, the discourses where we talk about the impact which COVID-19 as such has had on different areas, aspects of education, whether it be school education, higher education, curriculum, pedagogy, teachers or whatever students, or let's say context, the Northeast, South. Again, Northeast has a lot of states, so it is not like West Bengal have it differently, the same as let's say just Arunachal Pradesh or Assam. So I tried to bring in context from different parts of the country and things, and I was just trying to ascertain how the whole COVID-19 thing has impacted the education system in different pockets of the country, and then talk about how people are, dealing with it, how Kerala is having augmented reality, and their use of AI somewhere and other stuff, and how people are dealing with it. So that way we have to first have a basic understanding of the issues and how it is prevalent, and then we can think of how do you build a policy around it, or how do we sustain it, how one pocket of the country can learn from another pocket of the country or globe or whatever, how we can have a network of people who can come together to make it a sustaining thing. Because from where I said COVID-19 is going nowhere in near future. Maybe we can see it going somewhere far, maybe a year down the line, I don't know. But it is and we also don't see a vaccine in close vicinity. So the basic idea was to see the context and understand how education scenarios is, and what future it holds is something is still is a very open thing. I feel when you're open, you have possibilities. So that way we have a lot of possibilities, and it can develop into anything. But for now, it is just open this possibility.
That's an amazing statement, Priyank. Do you think COVID-19 will prove to be a tipping point for the change in the education system that we all want to see?
I have been. I would love to answer this question basically, because I think what COVID-19 has really done is, made people ask some questions which had to be asked long back. I'll give you another example. So I had asked this question to Professor Kishan Kumar when I met him, that why do we have K-12 system? Why there are age appropriate classes? Why is there student ability grouping? Why not have a flexible system? Why a certain amount of subject has to be studied in certain amount of time only and in certain year only? Why? Why do a system like this? So, and there's a lot of mugging up happening. Students don't just somehow mug it up and vomit it out in the exam. Why is that and all that? There's a lot of questions in my mind. So he gave a very simple answer to all that. He told me that in that year itself we had an exam whose papers were leaked. So the CBSE has put down a notice that we will have re-exam. So students were out on the streets. There were protests happening that we can't have re-exam. This is the mental burden. I don't understand how that is a big of a burden, but still there's a mental burden, and we cannot give re-exams. Parents are protesting, students are protesting, and CBSE had to say, okay, we'll have re-exams only in the area where cheating happened, nowhere else. Something like that happened. So Kishan Kumar told me the same thing. Why do you think that people, when know of all these things, they know the system is based on mugging up stuff, the system is not suited to child, then why don't people go on streets? No. If they go on streets and today keep protesting that we don't want a system which is based on exam, clearing exam, and we want a different system, then government has to do something about it. But it doesn't do, because people don't protest. Why people don't protest? Something you should think of, And again, who was the person who was protesting? Were the protests happening in villages? Who exactly were the people who were protesting? Those people who were coming from cities. They were people who had all the resources that students could re-study a particular exam, but still they were protesting. So the privilege of protest being limited to certain kind of, and then the whole system, he said, was based on convenience. That if you have K-12, it is easy for the system to be handled, for people to be monitored, for for people to produce students' education. You'll have to put efforts to have a different kind of system. That will require energy, investment, and that will require a lot more of resources. The government doesn't want to do because people are not, potentially protesting against it. So that is one thing. So coming back to your question, that COVID-19 has started asking some important questions. That, for example, that we are saying that online education is flexible. That student can learn and they can grasp things, and the teacher can teach. They can read, do the part, and student has also voice. That they can raise their voice against some pattern, or they're not liking that thing. Yeah, I don't understand why there was no voices when earlier. Why, when teacher walked into the class, students were so much fearful. They had to sit in one corner and only listen. No asking questions. Very dreadful. So the whole agency which has come to students, the voice which has come to students, had to existed always. But I'm amazed and also amused that now we are asking these questions. But I think COVID-19 has opened the box of questions. I just want that even if COVID-19 goes or stays, this box should not be closed. Let's keep asking those questions more and more.
Well, that's amazing. And on that note, I think I'm going to conclude the interview. Thank you so much, Priyank, for doing this. It was an amazing, interview, and you talked about so many things which I think a lot of educators also don't know about the Indian education system. And well, there you go, guys. This is Priyank. He speaks very clearly about a lot of things, and he's done his research about it. If you have any questions about Priyank or approaching the new normal, you can definitely look in the description. I'll share the contact details, and you can also visit the forum that we are part of now, Approaching the New Normal, and you'll see a lot more of these questions being asked and a lot more conversations happening. Thank you, Priyank.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you, Saurabh, for having me. Thank you.